Greetings and salutations, guys. I'm here with my review of Evil Dead Burn. This is the sixth movie in the Evil Dead series since 1981. It's funny to think back on how the original trilogy, there was like 6 year breaks between each movie, and then there was decades till the fourth one, and then another decade until the fifth one. But now, 3 years later, after Evil Dead Rise, we're getting another one, and they've already shot the seventh movie, Evil Dead Wrath, which is coming out in 2 years. So Warner Brothers has really picked up the pace on this franchise. This installment stars Suela Yakub as Alice, a young woman who goes to her in-laws' house in the wake of her husband's death, only to stumble upon a creepy, familiar book that will of course bring about big problems for her and everyone else in that house. French filmmaker Sebastian Vanisic is the director here. He also co-wrote the script, and it is very easy to see why Sam Raimi, who still produces these films, would want him to direct an Evil Dead movie, because this guy has a great eye. He brings a lot of creative flourishes to everything happening here and to the sort of insane Evil Dead action that we are expecting and want to see. I really appreciated the approach that Vanisic takes here. It really elevates a lot of the set pieces, because this is ultimately a pretty basic Evil Dead movie at its core. This is set at a remote house, and while it's not quite a cabin in the woods, is basically a cabin in the woods. It's going back to that sort of core aesthetic of the series. The last movie moved things to an urban setting. It was set in a big apartment building, and I do think that did help it feel different in a way that this one doesn't quite have. This many movies in, it would be nice to kind of shake up the formula even more, but I do think the direction helps here a lot and does give it a lot more vibrancy than it might have otherwise. There is an extra element here, and it's an interesting place for the series to go, but I don't think it ultimately works, which is there is a domestic abuse angle here and a theme running through this movie. And it's a weird fit. It doesn't quite work. And I was thinking about it a lot because I was thinking about how that there are certainly there are cheesy slasher movies that have kind of a loud, abrasive guy who's basically coded as like an abusive boyfriend douchebag that you want to see killed. And it works in the context of a movie where it's, exploitive, but also at the same time, you kind of get that release of like, well, that asshole, he's going to get it. Just feels a little off here. And maybe that's because the Evil Dead series is so much about like physical abuse as entertainment. It's not just stabbing, it's not just like a gory slasher kill. It gets pretty insane with what happens to people here. And even going back to the Bruce Campbell movies, it was slapstick, but it was like we enjoyed seeing Bruce Campbell get, the crap beaten out of him over and over again. Now the recent movies have gone really visceral with how gory and intense they get. And that is a fun part of the series for us sickos. But then you try to layer in this thing about domestic abuse and a very real life issue with, something that happens to people that's terrible, but it just feels like a weird thing to try to have be a theme in an Evil Dead movie where sometimes crappy people will get terrible things happening to them, but sometimes they don't deserve it at all. And yeah, I don't think it quite works. I understand what they were going for, but it did not seem like Evil Dead 6 maybe was the movie to tackle this sensitive subject matter. Because on the flip side, and I say this as a compliment, this is a mean movie. This is a nasty movie. Ever since the 2013 movie that they have really been leaning into that like, whoa, this bad things are going to happen to these people, and that is going to be part of the intensity and part of the vibe of it all. That happens here too, and it's really nasty and really cruel, but in a really kind of thrilling, well done horror movie way. And every character needs to watch out, whether they be man, woman, or animal. Yes, if you're sensitive about that sort of thing, be careful on this one. Again, I don't think it went too far because it is kind of the realm of this movie, but it was like, oh, we're not holding back here. If I have one complaint about the visual style of the movie, it's that it is too darkly lit. And, it is a fine line. It's a horror movie. I get it. Of course, they want to be creepy, darkly lit, and, atmosphere. But there are some scenes where I'm like, I can't quite see the action as well as I'd like to. And I wish it were a little brighter. But that aside, Vanisic's direction and the overall approach that he is taking here visually do really elevate the movie. And there's a lot of scenes where I just thought, oh, this is really fun what he's doing here. That includes a oneer we get that really kind of puts you into the thick of the action of what would it be like if you were in the middle of an Evil Dead scenario. There's a really fun scene where three characters are fighting inside the confined space of a car while insane Evil Dead things are happening left and right. We get a chaotic confrontation that is shot from above. Everything just feels different. And that's the cool thing about this movie, I think, is that really you think back on the set pieces and they do have something that stands out for pretty much all of them, whether it be a weapon used, the way someone was hurt or killed, or the way it was shot. They all feel distinct. They all feel special and like you're not seeing just the same thing happening over and over again. Yakub is a very appealing and charismatic lead, and it's easy to root for her. Also, she's a Swiss actress who's lived in France for much of her life, and she's playing a French character who has some subtitled French dialogue. And you know what? That's a cool touch here. And maybe it's funny to say that's a special thing, but when you think about American horror movies in general, but also, going this deep into a long-running horror franchise, you do look for things that feel, like they're not the norm, like they're not just like all the other movies. And having this French woman as the lead character here does have a different vibe to it than we're used to in these films. Also, I've probably been massacring her name and the director's name, and I apologize for that. The supporting cast are also good. That includes Tandy Wright, who played the mom in Pearl, who seems to have a new niche as a horror movie matriarch. And Wednesday and Daredevil Born Again's Hunter Doohan, in an interesting role as Alice's friendly but cowardly brother-in-law. I don't think Evil Dead Burn is as strong as the 2013 Evil Dead movie, which is a particular favorite of mine, or Evil Dead Rise. It is a little drop below those for some of those reasons with the script. And yet, ultimately, I still found it to be a satisfying new Evil Dead movie. And it's one of those things where, okay, yeah, it's kind of a little bit by numbers as far as, the storyline, and there's a couple elements I don't think quite work. And yet it's still delivering the sort of Evil Dead spectacle and gore and, freakiness. And it's got this extra flair from the direction. And so when you are at a part six of a horror franchise and you're still doing that, I think that's pretty good because we have seen much more dire places that horror series can go when they keep going this long. So I welcome more. I'm glad to know they've already shot the next one that comes out in a couple years. That's kind of amazing and crazy that we're at this place with Evil Dead. And I'm curious to see how that one will be. It's interesting that each one now has a different director. It's like the Mission Impossible movies in the early days. Everyone gets their shot at an Evil Dead movie, puts their own spin on it. I do want to see the story switch up a little bit more, though. So I know that the next one's a prequel. Beyond that, let's see what else they do with it. Evil Dead Burn will be in theaters this coming weekend to hopefully enjoy and possibly wince at. That's all for now, but if you can like and subscribe, you know what that makes you?
Groovy.